Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Let me set the scene for you. I live in one of those suburban neighborhoods where every lawn looks like it was trimmed with nail scissors, and the slightest deviation from perfection can land you a hefty fine. You know the type. Perfectly manicured streets where the color of your front door matters more than the character of the people living behind it. Our HOA has rules for everything, from the exact shade of beige your house can be painted to the approved species of flowers you can plant in your garden. I'm pretty much a live and let live kind of person. I keep my property tidy, follow the reasonable rules, and generally mind my own business. But I've always had a problem with bullies, especially those who hide behind authority to push people around. Unfortunately, our neighborhood was plagued by exactly that type of person. The HOA president was this woman who I'll call Karen because, well, if you've ever encountered a stereotypical HOA Karen, you know exactly what I'm talking about. She patrolled our streets in her little golf cart like some kind of suburban dictator, clipboard in hand, looking for violations with the enthusiasm of a treasure hunter. She knew every single bylaw by heart and wielded them like weapons against anyone who dared to step out of line. I'd had my own run-in with Karen about 6 months earlier. I'd planted some sunflowers in my front garden, beautiful, cheerful flowers that brightened up the whole street, but apparently they grew 2 inches taller than the HOASS approved height limit for front yard plantings. Karen showed up at my door with a violation notice, threatening daily fines if I didn't cut them down immediately. The whole thing was ridiculous, but I complied rather than deal with her nonsense. That incident left me with a simmering dislike for her methods and a keen awareness of just how petty she could be. What made Karen's power trip even more hypocritical was that she ran her own little home decor consulting business right from her house. She was always posting in the local Facebook groups about her services, sharing before and after photos of client homes, and advertising her rates. But somehow, that didn't count as a commercial enterprise in her twisted logic. Then, our new neighbor moved in. This lovely woman in her late 50s, who I'll call Eliza, had recently relocated to our area for some peace and quiet after years of city living. She was exactly the kind of neighbor you'd want. Friendly but not intrusive, always willing to lend a hand, and someone who took genuine pride in maintaining her property. Eliza had done her research before moving in. She'd checked all the city ordinances and HOA rules to make sure her plans were compliant. One of the things she was most excited about was setting up a small chicken coop in her backyard. She'd always dreamed of having chickens, and she'd found that the city allowed it as long as you followed certain guidelines about coop placement and maintenance. Her chicken coop was a thing of beauty, not some ramshackle structure, but a carefully designed and maintained setup that looked more like a tiny barn than anything unsightly. She kept it spotlessly clean, and her chickens were clearly well-cared-for pets. You could often see her in the evenings, sitting in her backyard with a cup of tea, watching her hens peck around their run. It was actually quite charming. The problem started when Eliza's chickens turned out to be incredibly productive. These weren't just decorative birds. They were laying more eggs than one person could possibly use. Being the practical and environmentally conscious person she was, Eliza started offering the surplus eggs to friends and neighbors rather than letting them go to waste. The money she collected just helped cover the cost of the high-quality organic feed she bought for her girls. To let people know she had eggs available, Eliza put up this beautiful hand-painted sign at the end of her driveway. It was rustic and charming, clearly handmade with care. The sign simply read, "Fresh farm eggs, inquire within," in lovely script lettering. It was the kind of touch that added character to our otherwise cookie-cutter neighborhood. I remember the first time I saw that sign. I was working in my front garden when she put it up, and I thought it was absolutely delightful. It reminded me of driving through farm country and seeing those roadside stands selling fresh produce. In a neighborhood where every house looked basically the same, Eliza's little sign was a breath of fresh air, a small touch of country charm that made the whole street feel more welcoming. Unfortunately, Karen saw things very differently. I happened to be watering my front garden the day Karen first spotted the sign during one of her neighborhood patrols. I watched as her golf cart came to an abrupt stop and her face darkened. You could practically see the gears turning in her head as she pulled out her clipboard and started furiously writing notes. In Karen's mind, that charming little sign wasn't a neighborly gesture. It was a blatant violation of HOA Bylaw 7.4, which prohibited any form of commercial enterprise from being operated from a residence. What happened next was painful to witness. Karen marched up to Eliza's front door with her violation clipboard clutched in her hand like a weapon. I could hear the entire confrontation from my yard, and it was clear that Eliza was completely caught off guard. Karen's tone was sharp and accusatory as she launched into her lecture about HOA rules and regulations. Eliza tried to explain in her soft-spoken way that she wasn't running a business. It was just a hobby, and she was sharing surplus eggs with friends to avoid waste. The sign was temporary, she said, just to let a few neighbors know when she had extras available. She emphasized that she wasn't making any real profit, just covering the cost of feed. But Karen was having none of it. She dismissed Eliza's explanations with the kind of arrogance that made my blood boil. She told Eliza that the rules were the rules, that this wasn't a farm stand, and that the sign had to come down immediately. She threatened daily fines of $100 if Eliza didn't cease all egg sales right away. Then, to add insult to injury, she slapped a bright orange violation sticker on Eliza's mailbox before storming off. I watched Eliza standing in her doorway looking absolutely distressed and humiliated. This sweet woman who had been nothing but a good neighbor was being treated like a criminal for sharing eggs with friends. It was infuriating. Being the non-confrontational person she was, Eliza immediately took down the sign. I felt terrible for her, but I figured that would be the end of it. She could still share eggs with the neighbors who already knew about them through word of mouth. The whole thing was ridiculous, but at least it was over, or so I thought. Karen apparently wasn't satisfied with just removing the sign. She had become convinced that Eliza was running some kind of underground egg distribution network and was determined to catch her in the act. Over the next few weeks, I noticed Karen's golf cart parked at the end of our street more frequently, and she was definitely keeping an eye on Eliza's house. Then came the day that changed everything. I was working from home when I heard a commotion outside. Looking out my window, I saw Karen practically vibrating with excitement as she watched a car pull up to Eliza's house. A woman got out, walked to the front door, and I could see her hand Eliza some cash in exchange for what looked like a carton of eggs. It was clearly just a friend picking up eggs. But in Karen's twisted mind, this was the smoking gun she'd been waiting for. Instead of handling this reasonably, maybe talking to Eliza again or issuing another HOA fine, Karen decided to escalate the situation to an absurd degree. She pulled out her phone and called the police, reporting what she described as an unlicensed food distribution operation. From her tone, you'd think Eliza was running some kind of black market food ring instead of sharing eggs with a friend. About 30 minutes later, I was shocked to see a police car pull up to Eliza's house with its lights silently flashing. The entire neighborhood came to a standstill. You could see curtains twitching in windows up and down the street as people tried to figure out what was happening. A police response to someone selling eggs to a friend was such a massive overreaction that everyone knew something was seriously wrong. That's when I decided I'd had enough of Karen's bullying tactics. I grabbed my phone and started recording as I walked over to see what was happening, telling myself I was documenting things for everyone's safety. The two officers who had responded were clearly professional, but were obligated to investigate the complaint they'd received. They were questioning Eliza, who looked like she was on the verge of tears as she tried to explain that she'd just sold a dozen eggs to a friend. Karen stood nearby with the most smugly triumphant expression I'd ever seen. She was practically glowing with satisfaction at having caught Eliza in her terrible crime of egg sharing. It was disgusting to watch. One of the officers, clearly trying to complete his paperwork properly, asked Eliza for the name of the person who had bought the eggs. Eliza, flustered and upset, said it was just her friend who was connected to her through family. When pressed for more details, she mentioned that the woman was a friend of her cousin. The officer asked for the cousin's full name for the report. Eliza said it was Robert Miller, and you could have heard a pin drop when the officer asked for clarification. "You mean Mayor Robert Miller?" Eliza nodded, explaining that yes, the mayor was her cousin, and he particularly loved her fresh eggs. The entire dynamic of the situation shifted in an instant. The officers exchanged a look that clearly said they realized they'd been dragged into a petty neighborhood dispute that had now become a potential political nightmare. Their demeanor toward Eliza immediately softened as they apologized profusely for the disturbance and assured her that she had done absolutely nothing wrong. Then they turned to Karen and gave her a sharp warning about wasting police resources on frivolous complaints. The look of shock and dismay on Karen's face as her moment of triumph crumbled was almost worth all the drama she'd caused. But as satisfying as that moment was, I knew Karen wasn't really defeated, just temporarily set back. She'd probably find some other way to make Eliza's life miserable. That's when I realized that if we wanted to end this cycle of harassment, someone needed to teach Karen a real lesson about the consequences of abusing power. That someone was going to be me. I spent that evening poring over the HOA bylaws with the intensity of a law student cramming for finals. Karen wanted to play the rules game? Fine. Let's see how she liked it when the rules were applied fairly and consistently. I highlighted not just the commercial enterprise rule she'd used against Eliza, but dozens of other obscure, ridiculous regulations that everyone in the neighborhood ignored on a daily basis. There were rules about garden hoses having to be coiled in a clockwise direction, restrictions on holiday decorations being displayed more than 14 days before the holiday, regulations about trash bins not being visible from the street for more than 3 hours before or after pickup. The list was endless and absurd. But the most important discovery was finding clear evidence of Karen's own violation of Bylaw 7.4. Her home decor consulting Facebook page was a treasure trove of commercial activity. Client testimonials, before and after photos, detailed price lists, and glowing reviews. She was clearly running a business from her home, which was exactly what she'd accused Eliza of doing. My first move was to file a formal, meticulously documented complaint against Karen for violating the same bylaw she'd used to harass Eliza. I included screenshots of her Facebook page, examples of her advertising, and evidence of her client interactions. I made sure every detail was perfect because I knew Karen would try to find any excuse to dismiss it. Then I shared the video I'd recorded of the police incident in our neighborhood's private Facebook group. I explained how Karen had harassed an innocent neighbor and wasted city resources over someone sharing eggs with friends. The post exploded with comments from neighbors who had their own stories about Karen's petty enforcement tactics and were fed up with her behavior. The response was incredible. Neighbor after neighbor shared their experiences of being targeted by Karen for minor infractions while watching her ignore the same rules when it came to her own property or that of her friends. People were angry and ready to take action. That's when I proposed we use Karen's own system against her. Over the next week, our neighborhood became the most rule-conscious place in the county. Neighbors who had been inspired by my post began methodically documenting every single violation they could find related to Karen's property. Her trash cans were out for 3.5 hours after pickup. Violation. Her welcome mat had unapproved lettering. Violation. Her wind chimes exceeded the approved decibel level. Violation. Her holiday decorations went up 15 days before the holiday. Violation. Karen's mailbox was soon flooded with the same bright orange violation stickers she'd been so fond of distributing. Every petty, ridiculous rule she'd ever enforced was now being applied to her with the same rigid inflexibility she'd shown others. The beautiful irony was that we were following her own precedents exactly. When Karen tried to argue that some of the violations were minor or that context should be considered, we simply quoted her own words back to her about how rules are rules, and there couldn't be exceptions. Within days, Karen was receiving more violation notices than the rest of the neighborhood combined. The woman who had terrorized everyone with her clipboard was now drowning in her own bureaucratic nightmare. Realizing she was losing control, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting. I could tell from the notice that she planned to try to publicly shame me and the other neighbors who had been documenting her violations. She probably thought she could intimidate everyone back into submission. She was wrong. The meeting was packed with more neighbors than had attended any HOA gathering in years. The atmosphere was electric with tension as Karen tried to start the meeting with a rant about troublemakers and rule breakers. But when she finished her speech, I calmly stood up and asked to address the group. I presented a logical, well-documented case showing evidence of Karen's selective and vindictive enforcement of rules. I showed screenshots of her business activities that violated the same bylaw she'd used to harass Eliza. I explained how she'd wasted police resources and harassed an innocent neighbor over sharing eggs with friends. Most importantly, I demonstrated the pattern of abuse and inconsistency that had made life miserable for so many residents. The room was with me. You could feel the mood shifting as neighbor after neighbor nodded in agreement and recognition. These were people who had been afraid to speak up individually but were finding strength in numbers. Then something happened that none of us expected. Just as the argument was reaching its peak, a late arrival walked into the room. It was Mayor Robert Miller himself, and he explained that he wasn't there in his official capacity as mayor, but as a concerned family member checking on his cousin Eliza after hearing about the police incident. The mayor's presence validated everything we'd been saying. He gave a powerful speech about what community was supposed to mean, emphasizing that HOA rules should be tools for building neighborhood harmony, not weapons for personal vendettas and harassment. When he looked directly at Karen while talking about abuse of authority, you could have heard a pin drop. With the mayor's tacit support and the overwhelming evidence of Karen's misconduct, the momentum in the room was unstoppable. Someone called for a vote of no confidence in Karen's leadership, and it passed by an overwhelming margin. After months of terrorizing the neighborhood, Karen was finally voted out as HOA president. In a turn of events I never saw coming, one of the neighbors nominated me for the position. Despite my initial reluctance, I found myself accepting the role and promising to lead with fairness and common sense instead of petty authoritarianism. As the new HOA president, my first priority was forming a committee to review and modernize our outdated bylaws. We amended the commercial enterprise rule to allow for small-scale hobbies and home businesses that didn't negatively impact the neighborhood. Things like Eliza's egg sharing and even Karen's consulting business, as long as they were conducted reasonably. We eliminated dozens of the ridiculous, petty rules that had been used as tools for harassment rather than legitimate community standards. Garden hoses could now be coiled in whatever direction people preferred. Holiday decorations could go up when families wanted to celebrate. Trash cans could sit out for reasonable periods without triggering fines. The change in neighborhood atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. People started talking to each other again instead of watching for violations. Children played in yards without parents worrying about grass height regulations. The community began to feel like an actual community instead of a police state. The final scene that really brought everything full circle happened a few weeks later. I was sitting on my front porch early one Saturday morning, enjoying my coffee and watching the neighborhood come to life. Eliza walked over with a fresh carton of eggs, a gift, she said, for everything I'd done to help her and the community. As we chatted about her chickens and the positive changes in the neighborhood, I reflected on how the whole situation had unfolded. Karen had wanted to make an example of Eliza, to show everyone what happened when you crossed the HOA president. In the end, we had made an example. But it was Karen who became the cautionary tale about what happens when power goes to someone's head. The transformation of our neighborhood proved that communities work best when they're built on mutual respect and common sense rather than fear and arbitrary rule enforcement. Karen's downfall wasn't just about revenge, it was about restoring balance and fairness to a place where people actually wanted to live. Looking back, I realized that sometimes the best way to deal with a bully isn't to back down or try to reason with them. Sometimes you have to use their own tactics against them until they understand that their behavior has consequences. Karen learned that lesson the hard way, and our whole community was better off for it. The sweet irony of the situation wasn't lost on me as I cracked open one of Eliza's fresh eggs for breakfast that morning. Karen had started this whole mess trying to shut down someone selling eggs, and now those same eggs had become a symbol of how our neighborhood had reclaimed its sense of community and common decency. As I sat there enjoying my breakfast and watching neighbors actually wave to each other instead of looking for violations to report, I couldn't help but think that revenge really is a dish best served with fresh eggs. Over easy. Update. 6 months later, the aftermath, and Karen's final surprise. Well, it's been about 6 months since I posted the original story, and I thought you all might want to know how things have played out. Spoiler alert, it gets even better. First, let me tell you about the positive changes in our neighborhood. The transformation has been absolutely incredible. We've gone from a place where people were afraid to put up a slightly different mailbox to a genuine community where neighbors actually help each other out. Eliza's egg business has flourished under the new, reasonable rules. She now has a proper little farm stand set up in her front yard on weekends, and the line of customers often stretches down the block. She's expanded to include fresh vegetables from her garden and even some of her famous homemade jam. The mayor stops by regularly, and it's become something of a neighborhood institution. Kids love visiting to see the chickens, and Eliza has started doing little educational sessions about sustainable living and animal care. The HOA itself has become what it was always supposed to be, a tool for maintaining reasonable community standards while preserving everyone's quality of life. We've focused on things that actually matter, like organizing neighborhood events, maintaining common areas, and helping elderly residents with yard work. Complaint submissions have dropped by about 90%, and the ones we do get are usually legitimate concerns that we can address through conversation rather than fines. But the real update involves Karen, and honestly, I couldn't have scripted this better if I tried. About 2 months after she was voted out, Karen put her house up for sale. At first, I figured she was just embarrassed and wanted a fresh start somewhere else. But then I started hearing rumors from other neighbors about why she was really leaving, and the truth turned out to be far more dramatic than any of us had imagined. It turns out that Karen's home decor consulting business wasn't just violating HOA rules, it was violating tax laws too. After our complaint about her commercial activities got filed, someone apparently forwarded the documentation to the appropriate authorities. The IRS launched an investigation into her business practices and discovered that she'd been operating for years without proper business licenses and had been significantly underreporting her income. But wait, it gets worse for Karen. The investigation also revealed that she'd been using her position as HOA president to funnel business to herself. Remember how she was always writing up violation notices for things like unapproved exterior paint colors or landscaping that doesn't meet community standards? Well, it turns out she was then approaching these same homeowners privately and offering her consulting services to help them fix the violations. She'd been creating problems just so she could sell solutions. One neighbor showed investigators email exchanges where Karen had threatened escalating fines if they didn't hire her to redesign their front garden. Another had recordings of phone calls where Karen suggested that certain contractors, who were paying her kickbacks, were the only ones who could do work that would meet HOA approval. The whole thing was a massive conflict of interest that had been going on for years. She'd essentially turned the HOA into her personal marketing department and was using fear tactics to drum up business. When the state licensing board got involved, they found violations of business ethics rules that resulted in significant fines and penalties. The mayor, bless him, was not happy when he learned the full extent of Karen's schemes. While he couldn't take official action in his role as mayor, he did make sure the right people knew about the situation. The city council ended up launching their own investigation into HOA practices citywide to prevent similar abuses. Karen's house sale became urgent when she realized she needed the money to pay back taxes, penalties, and legal fees. She ended up having to sell for significantly less than market value because buyers were spooked by all the drama. The cherry on top? Her buyer turned out to be a young couple with 3 kids and 2 dogs who specifically wanted a house where they could live without worrying about petty HOA harassment. But the absolute best part came just last month. I was working in my garden when I saw a familiar golf cart coming down the street. For a split second, my heart sank, thinking Karen was back to cause more trouble. But as the cart got closer, I realized it was being driven by someone else entirely. It was Eliza, and she'd bought Karen's old golf cart at the estate sale when Karen was liquidating her possessions. Eliza pulled up to my driveway with the biggest grin on her face, and explained that she'd been using the cart to deliver eggs to elderly neighbors who had trouble getting out. She'd painted over Karen's old HOA president decals and added cheerful decorations with pictures of her chickens. The transformation was perfect. Karen's symbol of petty authority had become Eliza's tool for community service. "I thought it was poetic justice," Eliza told me with a laugh. Plus, it was really cheap since nobody else wanted to buy anything associated with Karen. The neighborhood kids now chase after Eliza's decorated golf cart the same way they used to run from ice cream trucks. She's become something of a local celebrity, and the local newspaper even did a feature story about her urban farming initiative and community egg delivery service. As for Karen herself, I heard through the grapevine that she moved to a different state and is working for someone else's business rather than running her own. Apparently, the licensing issues and legal troubles made it difficult for her to continue as an independent consultant. The former vice president who took over Karen's consulting clients told one of my neighbors that several of them had been completely unaware that Karen was the same person who'd been writing them HOA violations. When they found out about the conflict of interest, they demanded refunds for services they felt had been obtained through coercion. Meanwhile, our neighborhood continues to thrive under common sense leadership. We've implemented a suggestion box system where residents can propose rule changes or improvements anonymously. We've started monthly community potlucks in the common area. We've even organized a neighborhood watch program that's actually about safety rather than hunting for bylaw violations. The egg incident also had ripple effects beyond our community. The mayor mentioned in a recent city council meeting that the situation had highlighted the need for better oversight of HOA operations. They've since passed an ordinance requiring HOAs to have transparent complaint processes and prohibiting board members from having financial interests in businesses that benefit from HOA enforcement. Several other neighborhoods have reached out asking for advice on dealing with similar situations. I've become something of an accidental expert on HOA reform, and I've helped residents in 3 other communities organize successful challenges to abusive board practices. The most satisfying long-term outcome, though, has been watching our property values actually increase since we got rid of the oppressive atmosphere Karen had created. It turns out that people prefer living in communities where they're treated with respect rather than fear. Who would have thought? Last weekend, we held our first annual Neighborhood Appreciation Day, complete with games, food booths, and yes, an egg decorating contest judged by Eliza herself. The turnout was amazing, with families from all over the area coming to join the celebration. Kids were running around playing games while adults actually enjoyed conversations without worrying about HOA spies taking notes. As I watched the festivities, I noticed the mayor had stopped by with his family. He spent most of his time at Eliza's booth, proudly telling anyone who would listen about his cousin's fresh eggs and sustainable farming practices. At one point, he pulled me aside to thank me again for standing up to the harassment and helping restore sanity to our community. "You know," he said, "when I first heard about the police being called over eggs, I thought it was just another example of local government waste. I had no idea it would lead to uncovering such a systematic abuse of power. Your neighborhood is lucky to have someone willing to fight for what's right." That meant a lot coming from him, but honestly, I think any decent person would have done the same thing when faced with Karen's bullying tactics. The best part of the whole day was watching Eliza in her element, surrounded by kids who were fascinated by her chickens and adults who appreciated her fresh produce. She'd gone from being harassed and humiliated by someone who should have been supporting community members to being celebrated as a neighborhood treasure. As the sun set on our festival, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in just 6 months. We'd gone from a neighborhood ruled by fear and petty authoritarianism to a genuine community where people looked out for each other. The transformation proved that sometimes standing up to bullies doesn't just solve the immediate problem, it can create positive changes that last for years. Karen's downfall wasn't just about getting revenge on one difficult person. It was about reclaiming our community's values and creating a place where everyone could thrive. And every time I see Eliza driving around in that decorated golf cart, delivering eggs with a smile instead of violation notices with a scowl, I'm reminded that sometimes the best victories are the ones that turn symbols of oppression into tools of community service. The whole experience taught me that ordinary people have more power than they realize when they're willing to stand up for what's right. It just takes someone willing to take that first step and show others that bullies only win when good people stay silent. So, that's the update. Our neighborhood is thriving, Karen learned that actions have consequences, and Eliza is living her best life as our unofficial community egg ambassador. Sometimes justice really does have a sense of humor, and revenge really is a dish best served with farm-fresh eggs and a side of poetic justice. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I worked for a government agency that provided a service to the public through a website. I was working on a part of the website that confirmed whether or not users wished to delete their user accounts. As usual, to protect against accidental or malicious account deletion, the user has to click Delete My Account. They are then shown a screen, "Are you sure you wish to delete your account?" And if they click Yes, then their browser goes off and tells the server to delete their account and withdraw from all jobs they've applied for. This next bit is a tiny bit technical for those who are interested. 1. When you go somewhere in your browser, it sends a GET request to the server because it wants to get the page contents plus image contents, etc. 2. When you submit a form, such as signing in or confirming you wish to delete your account, your browser sends a POST request to the server. A POST means the server is going to change something, such as deleting your account, whereas a GET merely means give me something but don't make any changes. When you click a link in a browser, for example from Twitter, your browser will only ever do a GET. It will asterisk, never asterisk a POST. This is why confirming you want to delete your account should be a POST, so nobody can trick you into visiting a link and doing some harm. So, back to the story. The project manager was really rubbish at her job. She wasn't technical at all. Another member of staff used to assist her, which basically involved him doing all of her work and her asking him how he did it, but never seeming to remember. I was making some modifications to the site in this area when I spotted the requirement was to have the delete account confirmation page as a GET. I pointed out to her that I could easily send her a link in an email, and if she clicked it, then it would delete her account on the server and withdraw her from all her job applications, and that we should change the requirement to make it a POST. To hide her inadequacies, she would often shout people down, and that's exactly what she did. Told me just to do what I am supposed to be doing rather than trying to change the requirements at this late stage and delay the release. The problem is, from experience, I knew that she often makes uneducated decisions, and then when they backfire, she either genuinely doesn't remember them or lies. So I went back to my computer and I wrote to her. Paraphrased, "Can you confirm something for me? The specification says to make the delete account confirmation screen a GET request. It really should be a POST because it deletes users' accounts. I am concerned a malicious person could post a link on Twitter and everyone who follows it will have their account deleted and all their job applications canceled. I just want to make sure I have understood you properly and I am not being thick. You said you want it to remain a GET request rather than changing it to the more secure POST request, is that right?" She replied, "Yes, as it is in the specification," so I went and implemented it as instructed. Once the changes had been deployed to our internal test servers, I emailed the head of the quality assurance team. "Hi, lead QA, have you seen this cool job on the server?" With a link to, can you guess? That's right, the delete account confirmation page. He received the email, opened it up, then clicked the link text that said, "This cool job." A browser opened, took him to the test server, and he was greeted with a message telling him how sorry we were to see him go, and that all his job applications have been withdrawn as requested. Lead QA. What? Where have all my test job applications gone? Typing frantically. Lead QA. They've actually gone. Is this a trick? Are they really deleted? He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He asked how I had hacked the system, and I explained to him the rookie error that had been made. He logged a top priority critical security fault and rejected the release candidate, delaying the release until it was fixed and could be retested the next day. When she saw the bug that had been logged, the project manager went mad. "Who wrote this?" she demanded to know loudly in front of the whole office. "I did," I said. "Why on earth would you make it so other people can so easily trick you into deleting your account?" I walked over to her so I could speak quietly and not embarrass her. "I did warn this would be possible, but you insisted this is the way you wanted it." Now this is the point where she always claims she would never do something stupid. "No, I said the opposite." Me. "No, you definitely said to do it this way." Her. "No, you've misunderstood. This way makes no sense. I would never have told you to do something that makes no sense. My experience was that she often told me to do things that made no sense, and then when they backfired, she would say she couldn't possibly have said to do something so nonsensical and the fault must lie with someone else." Her. "I suggest you go back and do it properly." I went back to my computer, pulled up the text conversation, and called her over. Me. "Look, this is where I explicitly asked if you want me to do it as a get as per the specification, and what will be possible if we don't change it to a post, and you told me to do it according to the specification." Her. Quietly. "Well, just change it." Me. I will do it properly." The release was delayed for a day so it could go through testing again. Note, testers wipe the server clean for each test round and rebuild the data through scripts, so I didn't upset the lead QA guy much. Anyway, thank